Are you both allowed to talk about like some of the long term bets at play at Patreon? Like, is that something we can get into? Like the when you first joined, like the long term bets that have made that like for the big investments that you all wanted to make early, and how you determine that those were the first investments to make
I
for the
think we
long term.
could probably chat about some of those things.
Yeah, I'd love to learn like the decision making process around like the early bets that you made and like what gave the go for those.
Patreon is going to be shipping a native video soon. Um, some of the creators, are already kind of in our beta program and using it. Um, but I think the question with native video is like, hey, like, why does Patreon need native video, right? Because the videos on Patreon today are, they're third party, right? So they're like YouTube or like Vimeo embeds, right? And for something like video, it is a very strategic project, right? And long term win for Patreon. And I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that, right? But I think one of the biggest reasons is uh, our goal as a company is to be the best memberships product for creators. And our hypothesis about how we can get there is by really kind of like coupling, right, content around community. And so an example of this is like, hey, in order for us to do that, both content, right, content and community on the platform today, content is say YouTube embed, community is say Discord integration. In order for us to do this really well, the community almost has to feel like it's part of the content, like it helps kind of like elevate the content, right? And so in order to do that, you need, in this case, videos to be this first class, primitive on the platform, right? And so this is a good example of like, hey, something that we're working on today that we're going to be, shipping pretty soon. And something like this is like, hey, like, the company is very, I would say, patient, just in terms of like, hey, the expectation for this, like at launch, right? The expectation for this at launch, like, isn't that it's going to, like, isn't that we're going to see like membership skyrocket, because that would just be unrealistic, right? Because this is like a longer term win. But at the same time, it's like, hey, as part of launch, we want to do, some things to help creators grow their memberships as part of launching that feature. And so, yeah, there'll be some things that we'll be sharing kind of like around this in the months ahead that I think will kind of make this like a bit more clear. But yeah, that's kind of like the general idea of how we approach some of these things.
John, what are your thoughts around that process? Does that kind of parallel some of the work that you've been doing, or like some of the, I guess, like similarities in your approach?
I really empathize with what Shannon said about expectations after a major product launch, especially since companies like Patreon it's a startup, right? Like, and all these new products that you're launching are new for your segment of the market, for your consumers. So having the organizational understanding that what we're launching is an MVP and that we're going to iterate on it really gives everybody who's working on that project the brain space, I think, and the frame of reference to think about the product launch and the thing that they're working on in a much more intentional and even sometimes creative manner. So I feel like with artificial constraints that sometimes are placed around product launches here or there, you create a different kind of product than you do as if you were to give a little bit more leeway to the team that's putting something into production for the first time.
Yeah. So, Atish, from your perspective, like, so this being, I guess, like Shimmy said, like a long term anchor, like, how does this sort of filter into the world of growth?
So first of all, I think the bunch of these products like video, for native video, for example, are things that we do fundamentally believe will drive growth as well, longer term. In terms of long term anchor, I think for growth you need to sort of think holistically in Patreon's world, both from creators and potential members' side. And truly understand what is perhaps preventing some creators from getting started. Is it really intimidating to start a membership product? Do they feel like they don't quite have product market fit? Do they feel like they're not exactly able to start or grow their business? And once you start asking the right questions and starting to think about them cleanly, talk to creators, get their feedback, do any data analysis, you start coming up with what are the potential hypotheses or solutions that can help this, how help sort of de-risk it, help remove the fear around starting a membership business. And so generally from a growth perspective, I'd say there's always lots of tactical things to do that are all still meaningful, elevating the value for both creators and members. But there are also fundamental questions that you want to ask as to where people are struggling very up funnel as well, including people who are not even thinking about Patreon. Why aren't they thinking about Patreon? And then those that are aware of Patreon but still not starting, why not? Once they start signing up, what are the hurdles that they face? What are the smart things that we can do to help them get started on what is likely to maximize their journey? And then also thinking about holistically, there are creators that are much, much bigger, top of market creators that would succeed regardless on any platform. Then there's so long mid-market creators, and then those that are aspiring creators and future kids who are not even thinking about it. But definitely we want to make it a legitimate long-term career profession that kids can aspire for, just like any other profession. So how do you sort of think about that holistically and then start building solutions that will empower them longer term? So that's kind of the way I think about sort of long-term growth.